When we find that place of wisdom, strength, and peace inside each one of us, we can truly move the world.
Welcome to Thrive On Live. I'm Caroline Moderesi-Tirani. What does it mean to lead mindfully? Well, that's something that Janice Moderano, the founder of the Institute for Mindful Leadership, wants to help instill in people. And Janice joins us now to talk about mindfulness, leadership training, and the forthcoming Big City Pause workshop, an immersive one-day program to help inspire mindful leaders. So Janice, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. So for those who are uninitiated, we've discussed this before, but what is mindfulness?
So one of the most common definitions for mindfulness is simply moment-to-moment awareness, and bringing to that awareness a sense of non-judgmentalness, so an open curiosity.
So open curiosity, I mean, what does that mean?
So being able to meet the moments of our lives with all of who we are, so all of our ability to be completely here for those moments and not be reactive and not be on autopilot, which is actually how most of us spend our day, on autopilot.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of people watching will agree. So, how do we take ourselves off autopilot then?
So part of the work that we do at the Institute and that we're going to bring to the Big City Pause is the training of the mind based in neuroscience. And what we understand about the mind is that it has innate capabilities, and we can train those innate capabilities so that we have greater mental resiliency, more focus, more clarity about what's actually here. And we do it both with a formalized training and these very short purposeful pauses that we take from time to time, all during the day.
So, purposeful pause, I think, is one of the words that jumped out at me when we were talking about this before. So, first of all, what is a purposeful pause?
So it's a mini training. So you take something that you do routinely all during the day. So when I ask groups that I work with at organizations about this, name something that you do every day. So they might say something like brush your teeth. Well, okay, you can take that time that it takes to brush your teeth, 90 seconds or however long it takes you to brush your teeth, and rather than going through your to-do list or ruminating about a conversation you had or planning for tomorrow's meeting, you just brush your teeth and you bring to it your attention, that moment-to-moment awareness. So you might hear the water from the faucet or feel the bristles on your teeth, and every time your mind goes off to your to-do list, you bring it back. It's that redirection that begins to develop our ability to be focused.
So now I said I would do a purposeful pause. Even though I feel like this is this is a trick almost. It's a very difficult challenge because for me there are people in my ear, there are people chatting me. You guys obviously are leaving comments, you're engaged in the conversation, but I'm going to try. Okay, Janice, I've got my cup of tea here that Mike has so graciously prepared for me. So thanks, Mike. So how do I have a purposeful pause right now?
Okay, so you're in the midst of an interview, and of course your mind is going through all those things you mentioned. So to begin with, let's start with what are the physical sensations about that cup of tea? What are you noticing right now? Just list them off. What do you notice?
The heat from the cup, the steam coming out of it, the paper on the tea bag, the feeling of warmth around my hands.
Perfect.
Holding it.
Perfect. And every time, if you continue to do that, you might take a sip and you might taste it in your mouth and you might feel it go down your throat. You might expand that to now feel your body sitting in the chair, your feet on the floor. All of those body sensations are purposeful pauses. They bring your attention to that moment to moment. Why? Because the only place you can feel a body sensation is in the present. And so how do we step off of autopilot in these little ways, these purposeful pauses, and there are millions of them, and we'll learn about them at the Big City Pause, but anything you do routinely is a purposeful pause. So it gives your mind and your body a chance to come back into the present.
So, I mean, it's interesting because as you're talking now and having just done it, I mean, I think I'm hearing you talk, but I'm also kind of feeling the cup a little bit more, maybe more at the forefront of my mind than I had been before.
Right.
Because, most of the time I'd just be listening to everything you're saying, and this would just sort of be part and parcel of the flow of the interview.
Yes.
But there is this sort of sense of competing interests, maybe, I don't know, competing with this and with what you're saying.
Well, you're expanding your repertoire of how you're meeting this moment. So it isn't to say that we're going to shut off our minds, because you can't do that. But you can allow yourself to be present, and our body sensations help ground us to the present. So that's one of the simplest ways to have a purposeful pause. And you can imagine that when you're in a difficult conversation, say at work, or you're in a meeting where everybody's jabbering and and your mind can start spinning into what am I going to say when there's an opening, or how am I going to do this? And you could get so caught up in that you cease to listen to what's happening around you. You cease to be connected to what's around you. And you can notice when that happens and say, you know what, let me feel my feet on the floor. As I'm here, I'm still in this meeting, I'm still having this conversation. I'm going to bring myself here. That's going to allow me to take in what's actually being said, and it's allow me to respond instead of react, to get off that autopilot and be our best selves, make our conscious choices.
I like this idea of being the best selves as well, our best selves. I want to bring in a member of our HuffPost Live community who has a series of questions around this as well. This is Janae Zinstros. So Janae, good to see you. Now, you are always a very busy bee. So, how often do you find times during the day to have a pause or just to even feel like you're being mindful?
Well, I actually, about a year ago, started integrating into my day schedule, which was silence. Ariana came out to Toronto maybe I think when she was promoting Thrive, she came out here about a year ago, and her and I had a really good conversation at her book signing. And one of the sections she talked about, becoming like a sleep evangelicus. What was it? Evangelist? I can't speak today, but but she just talked about sleep, and it was something that I was looking at connecting even with myself, getting more sleep. But silence was a big part of that, and I started meditating on a more consistent level. And I can't even begin to tell you how much just upping the ante with my sleep and adding a half an hour, 30 minutes of silence into my day, just over lunchtime. No food, no shutting off the phone, walking away from my office, going and just laying on the living room floor, not engaging anything, no distraction, and just laying there, like what I would do as a little child when I used to daydream.
Interesting. I like what you said about a little child there. Janice, how much of what Janae is saying is something that you try and cultivate and encourage at the Institute?
Well, what you're describing, the ability for us to feel again like that little child, what we're describing when we're talking about training our minds in this way is an innate capacity of our brains. We understand on some level that we need these pauses, that whether it's a half an hour or it's 2-minute purposeful pauses and 10 minutes of practice, whatever, there's a variety of ways, and we do understand a little bit about the dose response. There actually is a minimum amount you need to have.
What is the minimum?
So 2 10-minute segments or 1 20-minute segment a day is the minimum that we know so far. Research is continuing, but we know that at a minimum, if you have that much each day, we begin to see physiological changes to our brain. So what we're talking about,
yeah.
Okay, so what we're really talking about, the work that we do at the Institute is very neuroscience-based. And so we are talking about changes to the brain that expand or enlarge the portion of our brain that's associated with executive functioning, the conscious choices, the stepping off of autopilot and making the higher level decisions. And what is decreasing in size is the portion of our brain called the amygdala. So it's the reptilian part of our brain that is very reactive. It's the fight or flight. So when we're on this autopilot treadmill, we're going so quickly, we get into this fight or flight mode where we really don't have a chance to be our best selves, our whole selves, make that higher level choice, and instead we react. And so giving ourselves time during the day, and I like periodic purposeful pauses all during the day, because instead of ramping ourselves up like this all day long, falling exhausted into bed and starting again, when we take a purposeful pause, we kind of reset and we give ourselves a chance to kind of come back.
Yeah, I like this idea of the reset as well. Janae, describe what it feels like when you enact a purposeful pause, or when you just take a moment in the day to be more mindful. What happens to you physiologically, emotionally after going through that?
Well, it's just as what she was stating, I'm so much more present, and you can actually feel your presence in the moment. Like when you were talking about the coffee cup, you can actually feel the initial connection to whatever it is that you're doing. And so a part of the dynamic for that is
Dora Jane, look, see, we're trying to talk about mindfulness, and they
Multitasking.
but really, seriously, that's true though, right? Like, this is life. I mean, you know, you're trying to take a moment, you're trying to engage in a conversation, or it could be that you're trying to be mindful, and all of a sudden you got an iPad, an iPhone, whatever the hell was ringing in your house, Janae. You need to declutter some devices.
And this is a perfect example, right? Because normally when I do have post live, there's not these little nuances that are taking place, and everything's usually set up. But today was we're still having a holiday here in Canada, so.
But I think it evinces a good point, though, Janae. I think it really evinces a good point. You know, Janice, when you have a life like Janae, where, you know, she's dedicated to taking a purposeful pause or taking some time, and then you do have the pull, don't you, of the devices. I mean, you know, she's engaged with us right now. She's turning off her devices. She's, you know, not accepting that call. But it can be very difficult to sort of think, oh, but, you know, my BlackBerry's going off and my iPhone's going off. I really should just get that email and then I can come back to it. You know, how do you teach people to not do that, not succumb?
Right. So it's about making some conscious choices. But one of the things that's a very strong motivator for people is when we start to explain that our brain is not capable of multitasking. And so we have all been taught, I certainly was, I remember writing job descriptions, must be able to multitask. But in fact, what we understand from our study of the brain at this point is that we cannot multitask. We're simply not capable of doing it. So what we do instead is we flip back and forth like this, very quickly, from this to this to this to this. What they found when they studied productivity, so again back to workplace and how effective we are both at work and at home, is that there's a huge productivity loss, because when I move from this iPad to this tweet to this email to this project I'm studying, I can't pick it up where I left it off. And so I have to take a few steps back and ramp back into it. Well, that's a huge, that taking steps back and ramping back in is a huge productivity loss. When I explain that to professionals, we work with professionals at every level, and so we're excited about bringing these kinds of bits of neuroscience-based research to them, because when we explain that, people know that on some level. They know that, you know, I was working on this project and then I got distracted, somebody came into my office, and when I came back, yeah, I had to go back a few pages and bring myself back up to speed. So it rings true.
Interesting. Yeah, well, Janae, I know you had a question specifically for Janice, so take it away.
Yeah.
Well, the question I had for Janice is, how did you come about defining why mindfulness is the foundation of our emotional intelligence?
I'm sorry, I broke up a little bit. What mindfulness is? Say the rest of it.
Why mindfulness is the foundation of our emotional intelligence?
I think mindfulness, well, specifically what we do is mindful leadership. So it's actually the training, contemplative practice, the training of the mind, and this intersection with how do we become, each of us become someone who can lead with excellence, someone who can influence with excellence. And so certainly it's a big part of emotional intelligence, but the leadership aspect of it also brings in a reflection, which is another part of the training of our brain's capacity for reflection, to access wisdom, to have the spaciousness for creativity that brings us back to answering the question of how do I want to be in the world? Not what do I want to do, but how do I want to be in the world?
And, you know, why do you think that is what sort of defines good leaders, you know, the good leadership qualities?
Leadership presence is felt. So Janae mentioned that she could feel herself when she's more present. The truth is also everyone else around you can feel when you are present. The opposite is also true. So to be an effective influencer, whether you're talking about being an influence on friends or family or your team or your organization, people will feel when you are completely there for them, and they will feel disrespected when you're not there. So when you're physically here and you're doing the head nod and you're saying yes, 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 but people walk away saying, she didn't hear a word I said, or he didn't hear a word I said. How do they know? Because we were making eye contact and we were nodding our head, but you definitely know, and you're always right when you have that feeling.
I think that's a really good point. And, you know, guys in the community, if you could give an example of when maybe that's happened to you, I think that would be excellent. We have another community member joining us now to ask you a question. Her name's Kimberly O'Neill. It's the founder of the Giving Blueprint. So, Kimberly, good to see you. What's your question for Janice?
So I guess I've been practicing mindful leadership, and I have had no clue that there was a term for it. Mm-hmm. How do we begin to encourage leadership teams to shift towards more mindful leadership instead of leading with ego?
Yes, great question. Thank you. So one of the ways that it's really important when you bring this to your team or to your organization to speak about it in ways that are accessible. And one of the most effective ones, so I've been teaching this almost for a decade now, and I find that when we put it in terms of training the mind in the same way we have learned to train our body, that our body has innate capabilities, right? We know that if we train our bodies, they can become stronger, more flexible, more resilient. We also now know that if we train our minds, we can increase our focus, we can become more resilient, we can have a better capacity to see things clearly, and we can embody understanding, deep understanding and compassion. And that shows up in a whole host of ways, like communications, unconscious bias, all kinds of places where we're finding the kind of leader we need in the 21st century simply needs to have more access to more of our innate capacities of our mind. And we need to bring that forward in a way that people don't feel like you're trying to tell them to be someone different, but instead you're trying to invite them to explore being more of who they already are.
Oh, how does one do that effectively? I feel like today, and really for the last year and a half or so, mindfulness as an entity has kind of taken off. You've seen this, I'm sure, more than anybody else. How do you know that you're with a program or that you are being, I suppose, in a way, authentic and not sort of succumbing to the commodification of the idea of mindfulness?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you. And it's really important that people do their homework and that they check and see, and that there's an understanding that if somebody's offering you something that they say is going to take you into the world of training your mind, and it's only going to take 2 seconds a day, or you're going to learn it from an app, or those things can be nice intros, but in order for you to really appreciate and get the full advantage of training your mind, it's important to be with a program that is based in some strong history, some strong neuroscience that will be with you for the journey, that it's not just, okay, come for an hour, done, you learn mindfulness. It doesn't work that way. And it takes a while and it takes commitment, just like physical fitness.
Okay, interesting. Well, I've got another video question. This is coming in from another member of our community. It's Ofo Izugu. Let's just take a look.
First, how do you go about balancing and maintaining a company culture when your team is split in different locations? And also, how do you go about ensuring that the work quality is still of high standard as you would have it when you're all in one location? The second question is, what books have you read and how have they helped you to really become a better leader? So which ones have really inspired you to do more and have also taught you in the process? And lastly, leadership and management are two different things, but both need each other in order to survive. So how do you go about really going from being that inspiring person to get people to do things to now, okay, we need to get 50 people to do X by the end of the week so that we can achieve Y? How do you become more goal focused and data driven as opposed to just being more openly, kind of intrinsically being a leader?
Yeah.
So lots of good questions. So maybe the field the latter one first, if you would. So leadership and management are two different things. How do you get people to go from being inspiring to getting people to actually do things to achieve a goal?
Yeah, and these are great questions. So a mindful leader is really cultivating 4 fundamentals, and they actually hit on all 3 of the questions that he mentioned. So one of the things that if you need to improve or cultivate is your ability to stay focused, to not be distracted by what screams the loudest, but to stay with what's important. So it's the urgent versus the important, and being able to have some clarity around what's actually here would be the second fundamental. So focus, the second one's clarity. Not what I expected to be here, what I hoped would be here, or what I wanted to be here, but what's actually here. And in the 21st century, when we have a global marketplace, where resources are global, we're asked to do more with less, it's really important that a leader have that capacity to do that. And in order for you to see clearly, you need to know something about what your own filters are. And that comes from contemplative practice and reflection that we teach. The third one is our ability to have the spaciousness in our mind for creativity. So some of what he talked about, that leadership versus management, it comes from how do you want to lead? How do you want to be connected to the people around you? Not command and control, but how do I skillfully bring everyone along? listen deeply to people. And some of that requires us to be creative and innovative. And what we understand about our brain, again, is that we need spaciousness for creativity and innovation. And when we're in that autopilot, that to-do list that never ends, no spaciousness. So it gets in the way of creativity. Finally, the fourth fundamental that we use at the Institute is compassion. So compassion meaning deep understanding. It doesn't mean sympathy, it doesn't mean empathy, but a deep understanding of who are the people in my team? Who are these folks who are my colleagues? How can we connect in a way that will get it done and at the same time be open to what it takes to be connected and be inspired?
I think that takes us back really to his first question as well, which is, what if you have teams that are in all different parts of the country? You know, you can't perhaps instill this sense of mindfulness from the top because you're not physically there. How does one approach that?
Right. So I still think it comes back to the kind of training that is available. And so either if you have a time when we work with organizations where they do organizational retreats, so maybe there's a time when they bring everyone together and we can go and offer Big City Pause that's organization specific, or we offer a live training over 4 sessions that's online. And that has been helpful to organizations that are international where they have their groups together and they learn together, and each week we add more to it and then they work together internationally. So it's about having, again, the kind of quality offerings that meet your needs.
And I guess the one that most interested me out of those questions is, which books have you been reading or what have you been engaging with that have inspired you to be more mindful, a better mindful leader?
Yeah, I've read a number of books on leadership over my career. And the reason I wrote Finding the Space to Lead is because I wanted there to be a how-to for professionals. I wanted professionals to be able to pick up the book and be able to go chapter by chapter, and there are free downloads and free leadership reflections and lots of examples of purposeful pauses and stories that are real stories from people I've worked with over the years. And so this is the how-to for mindful leadership book. This is the one where you can do it, and in the back it has a week by week. When we are offering the Big City Pause in New York, which I want to make sure I have a chance to talk about a little bit, it is a one day that will be an immersion. So one day where you will go in and not just get an hour or not just get a taste, but a full training in training mindful leadership, and then an explanation of, okay, and everyone gets a free book, and they take the book home and the free downloads, and they're ready to go with, okay, next week. So for the questions about, well, how do we get a taste, or I'm not sure if it's right for my company, or maybe a small team wants to try it out, that's one of the reasons that we are excited to bring Big City Pause on May 15th to New York, because it will, I think, meet that need for people who say, well, I've heard a lot about it, I'm not quite sure. And how do I get started, really get started?
I guess my final question for you, really, Janice, is you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, you know, you were an extremely high-powered exec vice president at General Mills. So when you're talking about leadership, you know what you're talking about. What do you get when you go to events like the Big City Pause? I mean, you know, you're the expert in this. Do you still learn lessons when you go to these events?
Always. And I always learn more than anyone else in the room, because what I gain every time I go is, of course, when I'm guiding practice or I'm guiding reflection, I'm practicing right there with everyone. But what I love the most is that I get to connect with folks who are doing incredibly difficult, complex jobs, the jobs I'm well familiar with, trying to lead in the 21st century. And hearing from them, and then later on, because we are always committed to being there for the journey, we hear months later, years later from people about how it's impacted their lives. And so
is there
learning
one that stuck
from
out
them.
for you in particular? Is there a story that stuck out for you in particular?
Yeah, I guess it was a story of a CEO of an aerodynamics firm that was on retreat, and we had gone into a period of silence. Well, he was very much attached to his smartphone, and so in the days preceding a period of time where we were going to be in silence, the minute he stepped out of the meditation hall, he was like reaching in the pocket for like seconds, like 1 foot outside the door. But then for that period of silence, I invited everyone to put them away for that period. And that night we dropped into silence, and just before I dropped the group into silence, I'd walked in from outside and I saw this incredibly gorgeous sky full of stars. And I just mentioned that, oh, anybody see the stars? They were beautiful. The next day when we dissolved the silence, he was the first person to speak, and he basically said this. He said, you know, Janice told us we had to put our iPhones away, so I did. And of course, she mentioned something about stars that night, and when I stepped outside, my hand reached into my pocket, which of course was empty, but I reached for it. And then I remembered that thing about the stars, and I looked up, and I realized that I hadn't seen the stars in 20 years. And I
Wow.
lay down on the grass for a long time, just taking in the stars. The next morning, when the alarm went off for our morning session, the first thought in my mind was, how much else have I missed because I did this?
Wow.
It was an amazing moment.
I'm sure that a lot of people watching are probably jaw dropped and thinking, wow, that's just me. That's
Yeah.
me all over. Well, Janice, what a pleasure, as always. Thank you so much for coming in to HuffPost Live today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. And guys, thank you very much as well to all of the members of our HuffPost Live community who sent their questions in. If you want to learn more about becoming a mindful leader, or if you're in New York City and you're interested in attending the Institute's Big City Pause workshop on Friday, May 15th, you can visit the links in our resource well below. Stay tuned, much more coming up on HuffPost Live.